The gray light of a false dawn had barely begun to fracture the eastern sky over the Pacific on the morning of April 16, 1945. Lieutenant Commander John Harrison, executive officer of the USS Laffey, DD-724, stood on the destroyer's bridge, the biting wind whipping at his khaki uniform. Around him, the deep, rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines, driving her through the swells at 20 knots, was a familiar, comforting presence, a counterpoint to the relentless tension that had become the very air they breathed. They were on Radar Picket Station One, a lonely sentinel 30 miles north of Okinawa, a position of unparalleled danger within the sprawling armada of Task Force 58, the United States Navy's fast carrier force. For weeks, since the start of the Okinawa Campaign on April 1st, these picket stations had been the frontline, the first warning against the insidious, fanatical kamikaze attacks that were now the primary terror weapon of the Imperial Japanese Navy. Every dawn brought with it a fresh wave of anxiety, a visceral tightening in the gut. The Okinawa Campaign was proving to be a meat grinder, far more brutal than anticipated. On the main island, the U.S. 10th Army, composed of the U.S. Marine Corps' 3 Amphibious Corps and the U.S. Army Ziv Corps, was locked in a horrific struggle against General Ushijima's 32nd Army, dug deep into the Shuri Castle defensive line. But out here at sea, the battle was different, a duel between ships and suicidal aircraft, a contest of technology and human will. The USS Laffey, a Sumner-class destroyer, was a steel marvel, armed with 6 5-inch 127mm dual-purpose guns in 3 twin turrets, 12 40mm Bofors anti-aircraft guns in 4 quad mounts, and 11 20mm Oerlikons. She was designed to fight on the surface and in the air, a potent weapon system, but even her formidable armament felt meager against the sheer, unbridled fanaticism of the kamikazes. Harrison ran a gloved hand over the cold, salt-laced railing of the bridge. His eyes, perpetually bloodshot from lack of sleep, scanned the horizon, then flicked to the distant, pulsating green sweep of the radar screen in the Combat Information Center, or CIC, directly below him. The routine was ingrained. General quarters at sunrise, remaining at battle stations until sunset, then a reduced alert status, but with gun crews still at the ready, sleeping near their weapons. The crew, most of them barely out of their teens, carried the exhaustion like a shroud, but their discipline remained unshaken. They were veterans of other Pacific engagements, having already seen action in the Marianas and Leyte, but Okinawa was a different beast entirely. The Japanese seemed to have an endless supply of aircraft and pilots willing to sacrifice themselves. The term kikusui, or floating chrysanthemums, had begun circulating, the Japanese name for these mass kamikaze attacks, a poetic yet chilling description of a weapon designed for pure destruction. The first hint of trouble often came from the radar picket stations, these lonely outposts where destroyers like the USS Laffey operated. They were the eyes and ears of Task Force 58, their radar antennae sweeping the vast expanse of ocean and sky for incoming threats. A blip on the screen, a distant echo of metal, could mean the start of a fight for survival against a Japanese Zero or a Val dive bomber. These initial contacts were crucial, allowing the carrier task groups, the heart of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, to vector their combat air patrol, the Grumman F-6F Hellcats and Vought F for U Corsairs, for interception. But sometimes the attacks were too sudden, too overwhelming, or simply too clever for the fighter screen. That was when the picket destroyers had to stand and fight, absorbing the fury of the enemy's suicide attacks, becoming, in essence, sacrificial lambs to protect the invaluable aircraft carriers and battleships of the fleet. The Laffey and her sister ships performed this self-sacrificing service day after day, a testament to the courage and sheer tenacity of their crews. The morning of April 16th began like many others, with the low clouds that often blanketed the approaches to Okinawa. Visibility was poor, a heavy gray mist clinging to the waves, offering both a potential shield and a potential blind spot. Ensign Mike Collins, the junior officer of the deck, stood beside Harrison, his young face grim. "Radar reports scattered contacts, sir," he reported, his voice low, almost swallowed by the wind. "Small groups, very low. Could be anything, but they're moving fast." The anything was the unspoken terror. Kamikazes. At 0827 hours, the comm shattered. The destroyer's radar, its powerful pulses piercing the mist, painted a terrifying picture. A large group of aircraft, at least 25, approaching from the north. General quarters. General quarters. All hands man your battle stations. The ship's claxons wailed, a shrill, piercing cry that sent men scrambling through steel hatches and down narrow companionways. Gun crews, already half awake, sprinted to their positions, slapping clips into ready racks, swinging the heavy barrels of their 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons into arc. Harrison gripped the railing, his knuckles white. The ship's main battery, the forward and aft 5-inch gun turrets, traversed, their heavy steel bulk groaning as they locked onto the approaching bearing. On radar, the incoming groups coalesced into a single, undeniable threat. A concentrated Kikusui attack, 165 aircraft strong, specifically targeting the radar picket stations. The fighters were probably already engaged, but too many were breaking through. The air on the bridge thrummed with a new, frantic energy. Men shouted reports, range, bearing, target type. Below, in the CIC, the plotting teams frantically tracked the incoming bogies, their grease pencils leaving frantic trails on the transparent screens. The Laffey was alone on Picket Station One, a solitary bulwark against the tide. The first aircraft, a single-engine Japanese Val dive bomber, burst through the clouds at 0830, a dark, malevolent shape hurtling towards them from the starboard bow. It was low, skipping over the waves, too quick for the carrier-based combat air patrol to intercept. The ship's 5-inch guns opened fire first, their deafening roar shaking the destroyer to its very keel, the empty shell casings clattering onto the deck. The 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons joined in, tracing arcs of deadly, incandescent tracer fire into the gray sky. The combined anti-aircraft fire was a wall of steel, a desperate, concentrated barrage designed to tear the incoming aircraft apart. The Val jinked violently, a desperate maneuver, but the concentrated fire was too much. It disintegrated in a fiery explosion roughly 1,000 yards out, scattering debris and a mushroom cloud of black smoke across the water. A cheer, ragged and hoarse, went up from the gun crews, a momentary reprieve. But there was no time for celebration. Another Val, almost immediately, followed the trajectory of the first, its engine a high-pitched scream. This one pressed its attack with grim determination. The 5-inch guns barked again, their muzzles spitting flame and hot gas. The 40mm shells ripped into the Val's wing, tearing fabric and metal. It wobbled, then slammed into the water roughly 50 yards off the starboard quarter, its bomb detonating on impact. The explosion sent a towering geyser of water high into the air, drenching the aft sections of the Laffey with cold, saline spray. The concussive blast rattled the ship, knocking men off their feet and momentarily stunning those on deck. The ship shuddered, but held. Damage control teams immediately reported the impact, checking for structural integrity. The attacks came in waves, relentless and terrifying. Japanese Zeros, faster and more agile, darted in and out of the clouds, strafing the decks with their 77mm and 20mm machine guns, their bullets stitching lines of destruction across the steel. Gun crews, exposed on their mounts, kept firing, their faces grim, their movements mechanical. The smell of cordite and burning metal hung heavy in the air. The ship's anti-aircraft defenses, working in a coordinated frenzy, took their toll. Commander Frederick Beckton, the Laffey's commanding officer, a stoic and courageous man, called out orders from the open bridge, his voice calm amidst the maelstrom. "Keep the fire concentrated. Don't let them get too close." Harrison relayed the orders, his eyes scanning for the next threat, his mind a blur of calculations. At 0845, a Japanese Zero came screaming in from the stern, too fast for the aft 5-inch guns to fully traverse. It dipped low, its landing gear extended, a chilling sign of a deliberate, precise attack. Before the 20mm Oerlikons could get a full lock, it released its bomb. The bomb slammed into the Laffey's fantail, detonating with a shattering roar. The explosion ripped through the stern, blowing a hole in the main deck near the 5-inch gun turret number 3. Flaming debris, twisted metal, and human remains were flung across the deck. The ship reeled, a shuddering groan of tortured steel. Below decks, the engine room reported a partial loss of power as steam lines were ruptured. Damage control parties, led by Chief Petty Officer Frank Miller, a veteran from Brooklyn, sprang into action, battling fires and shoring up bulkheads in the aft sections of the ship. The USS Laffey was wounded. Within minutes, another valve bore down on the Laffey's port side. This was part of a coordinated two-pronged attack, a textbook kamikaze maneuver designed to overwhelm defenses. The ship's portside 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons hammered the incoming aircraft, but it was too close, too committed. It smashed into the port-forward 20mm gun tub, its impact rupturing fuel tanks and spraying flaming aviation gasoline across the deck. The ensuing explosion vaporized the gun tub and its crew, scattering their bodies across the forward superstructure. The bridge itself was engulfed in flames for a terrifying moment, forcing Harrison and Commander Becton to duck for cover. The intense heat was searing, the acrid smell of burning fuel filling their lungs. Despite the immediate and devastating impact, the ship's remaining guns continued to fire, a testament to the iron discipline of the surviving gunners. The battle raged for over 80 minutes, a blur of explosions, tracer fire, and desperate damage control. The Laffey absorbed 6 direct kamikaze strikes, 4 bombs and multiple strafing runs. The ship was hit repeatedly, transformed from a sleek warship into a burning, smoking wreck. The forward 5-inch turret, number 1, was hit by a Judy dive bomber at 0900, its bomb piercing the deck and detonating in the magazine below. The resulting explosion, a thunderous, concussive blast, blew the turret clean off its mount, sending its heavy steel barrel cartwheeling into the sea. The deck around it buckled and tore, creating a gaping maw in the ship's hull. The concussion was so immense it ripped communication lines, leaving the bridge largely cut off from the forward sections. When the forward 5-inch guns fell silent, a profound, chilling quiet settled on the bridge. It was a silence that spoke volumes, a terrible confirmation of their vulnerability. That was the moment Harrison realized with a sickening lurch that they were sitting ducks. They had absorbed devastating blows. Their primary offensive power was crippled. Without those heavy guns, their ability to shoot down incoming aircraft was drastically reduced. The ship was listing 10 degrees to port, and flames raged from multiple locations on the superstructure and below decks. Smoke, thick and black, billowed from the numerous impact points, obscuring visibility and making damage assessment a nightmare. Yet, amidst the chaos, the crew's resilience shone like a beacon. Lieutenant Charles Thompson, the damage control officer, a wiry man with an unshakable calm, was a blur of motion, directing teams to flood compartments to counter the list, to fight the raging fires with foam and water. He moved with a practiced efficiency, shouting orders, pointing, never once flinching as another valve screamed past, its bullets ripping into the mast above his head. The surviving 40mm Bofors and 20mm Oerlikons, though reduced in number and manned by exhausted crews, continued to engage any aircraft that dared to approach. The sound of their rapid fire, a desperate drumming against the roaring inferno, was the only thing standing between the Laffey and oblivion. At 0915, a particularly determined Zero bore down on the ship's bridge, its pilot seemingly intent on taking out the command staff. Commander Becton, despite shrapnel wounds to his arm, continued to bark orders, maneuvering the crippled destroyer, attempting to present the smallest target possible. The ship's remaining guns converged on the Zero, filling the air with a desperate, concentrated fire. The Zero seemed to fly through a wall of explosions, but it pressed on. At the last possible second, a stream of 40mm shells ripped into its fuselage. It exploded just 15 feet off the port quarter, showering the ship with burning fragments of metal and flesh. The impact jostled the Laffey again, but this time the damage was primarily external, the ship already so scarred that it absorbed the shock. The attacks, seemingly endless, began to thin around 0947. Exhausted, smoke-blackened gunners slumped at their stations, their ears ringing, their eyes stinging. The sky, which had been a maelstrom of screaming aircraft and exploding shells, gradually returned to a semblance of calm, broken only by the crackle of burning debris and the urgent shouts of damage control parties. The USS Laffey was still afloat. She was a ruin, battered and burning, her superstructure torn and twisted, her decks awash with water and foam, but she was alive. The forward 5-inch turret was gone, replaced by a gaping hole. The aft 5-inch turret was disabled, its gun barrels jammed. Several of the 40mm and 20mm gun tubs were completely destroyed, their steel walls shredded, their crews annihilated. The ship was a testament to the impossible. Commander Beckton, his face smeared with grease and ash, walked slowly to the edge of the bridge, surveying the devastation. Harrison followed him, his own body aching from the concussions, his mind numb from the sheer intensity of the past hour. The Laffey's losses were grievous. 32 men killed, 71 wounded, many severely. But given the ferocity and number of hits, it was a miracle she hadn't sunk. She had taken more direct hits than any other U.S. Navy ship during a single kamikaze engagement and survived. The radio crackled back to life, establishing contact with Task Force 58. USS Laffey reports heavy damage, unable to maintain position, requires assistance. Request immediate tow. The voice was strained but clear. Other destroyers, like the USS Macomb, DD-667, were quickly dispatched to assist, providing a protective screen and dispatching their own damage control teams and medical personnel to help the wounded. The days that followed were a blur of recovery and grim reflection. The Laffey was eventually towed to Guam for temporary repairs, a long, slow journey across the vast Pacific, her wounds a stark reminder of the battle. In the relative calm of Guam's naval repair facility, Harrison had time to process the events of April 16th. He spoke to the surviving gunners, to the damage control crews, to the medical personnel. Their stories were harrowing, tales of individual courage and collective resilience against a foe that defied conventional logic. He learned the precise details. A total of 22 aircraft attacked the Laffey directly, with 6 kamikazes crashing into her hull or superstructure, and 4 bombs detonating on board. The rest were shot down by the ship's gunners, or diverted by sheer weight of fire. The sheer volume of incoming ordnance was astronomical. The Battle of Okinawa continued its brutal course. The Laffey's experience was far from unique. The radar picket stations remained the most dangerous assignments in the Okinawa Campaign. Days later, on May 3rd, the destroyer USS Little, DD-803, and the destroyer escort USS Aaron Ward, DM-34, were annihilated in a concentrated kamikaze assault on Picket Station 10, both sinking within minutes after sustaining multiple direct hits. The sheer scale of these Kikusui attacks, involving hundreds of aircraft, was designed to break the will of the U.S. Navy. The Laffey had survived, but the psychological scars on her crew ran deep. Every sudden sound, every distant drone of an aircraft engine, would send a jolt of adrenaline through their systems for years to come. Many veterans of Okinawa would later describe a permanent alteration to their perception, a hyper-awareness of the sky, an instinctive scanning for the telltale glint of a wing. Harrison visited the Laffey in dry dock at Guam, her once pristine hull now a patchwork of scarred, twisted metal and newly welded plates. He saw the gaping hole where turret number 1 had once stood, a grim testament to the devastating force of the Japanese Judy's bomb. The ship would eventually make her way back to the United States for extensive repairs, a journey of thousands of miles, but she would never be quite the same. The battle, the Okinawa Campaign as a whole, demonstrated the terrifying effectiveness of the kamikaze as a tactical weapon, a horrifying innovation that forced the U.S. Navy to rethink its defensive strategies. It accelerated the development of guided missile technology and vastly improved damage control training, transforming naval doctrine for decades to come. The experience of the radar picket destroyers, their selfless, almost sacrificial role, became a defining chapter in naval history, a testament to raw, unyielding courage. He remembered the early days of the campaign, the briefings in the wardroom, the confidence that their superior technology and training would quickly overcome any Japanese resistance. They had faced the conventional enemy before, the skilled pilots and disciplined sailors. But the kamikaze was different. It defied logic, it defied training, it defied survival. It was pure, unadulterated resolve, weaponized. And in that, Harrison understood, lay the true horror of Okinawa. It was not just a battle against an enemy, but against an idea, an ideology of absolute self-sacrifice that pitted human against machine in a way that had never been seen before. The men of the Laffey and the other radar picket ships had stood against that ideology, absorbing its full fury, and in doing so had bought time, bought lives, and ultimately bought victory. But the cost was immense, measured not just in ships and lives, but in the shattered nerves and haunted eyes of those who survived. The USS Laffey, the ship that would not die, became a legend, her story repeated with awe and respect throughout the fleet. But for John Harrison, it was more than a legend. It was a memory etched in fire and blood. He remembered the moments of terror, the desperate struggle against the flames, the agonizing wait for news from below decks, the relief that surged through him when Chief Petty Officer Miller reported the fires contained, the list slowly correcting. He remembered the faces of the young sailors, their fear, their courage, their unwavering commitment to their guns even as their world exploded around them. He remembered the stark, undeniable truth that settled upon him as the forward 5-inch guns fell silent. The realization that they were vulnerable, that even the most powerful warship was fragile, that they were indeed, at that moment, sitting ducks. Yet, in that vulnerability, in that desperate, exposed fight for survival lay the core of their triumph. They had survived not by their overwhelming strength, but by their sheer refusal to yield, by an extraordinary demonstration of human tenacity against an unthinkable threat. The Okinawa Campaign would forever define a generation of sailors, and the Laffey's fight would be their epic, a whispered tale of hell and heroism on the farthest reaches of the radar picket line. The strategic imperative behind these isolated radar picket stations off Okinawa was brutally simple. Provide early warning for the main force of Task Force 58, which included 9 fleet carriers like the USS Enterprise, CV-6, and USS Bunker Hill, CV-17, 7 battleships such as the USS Missouri, BB-63, and USS Nevada, BB-36, and numerous cruisers and destroyers. These capital ships were the true targets of the kamikazes. By absorbing the initial brunt of the Kikusui attacks, the picket destroyers effectively extended the radar umbrella of the main fleet, buying precious minutes for the Hellcats and Corsairs of the Combat Air Patrol, CAP, to scramble and intercept, or for the carriers to maneuver. On April 16th alone, the Laffey's ordeal, while horrific, provided critical time. Her survival, against all odds, proved the value of these forward screens. The Laffey's ordeal on April 16, 1945, was meticulously documented in after-action reports and became a case study in naval damage control. The ship, struck by an Aichi D-3A Val and a Nakajima B-5 Nkate among other aircraft, endured an unprecedented barrage. One Val reportedly struck the Laffey's deckhouse aft of the superstructure, destroying a 20mm Oerlikon mount and igniting immediate fires. A few minutes later, at 0847, a Zero hit the aft 5-inch gun turret, Turret 3, the impact and subsequent bomb detonation disabling the turret and killing its crew. The fires on the stern were intense, fueled by aviation gasoline and ammunition. Another Val crashed into the forward 5-inch gun turret, Turret 2, which exploded, tearing open the deck and rendering the turret inoperable. The main 5-inch guns, the very heart of the destroyer's firepower, were silenced. Lieutenant Commander Harrison could feel the concussive blasts reverberating through the deck plates beneath his feet on the bridge, the smell of burning paint and hydraulic fluid acrid in the humid air. The communication lines to the ship's engine room were intermittently lost, creating a terrifying void of information. The battle below decks was as brutal as the one above. Chief Petty Officer Frank Miller, a burly, unflappable man with 20 years of service, moved through the smoke-filled passages of the Laffey like a phantom. His damage control teams, composed of engineers, mechanics, and ordinary seamen, grappled with ruptured steam pipes, gushing water from massive hull breaches, and raging electrical fires. In one forward compartment, A kamikaze's bomb had torn through the deck, spraying shrapnel and incendiary material. Miller personally led a team, using fire hoses to douse the flames, their faces streaming with sweat, their lungs burning from the smoke. The ship's internal communications system, the 1MC, crackled with static, but Miller's shouted orders, relayed by runners, cut through the din. Seal off compartment at 204. Shoring party to the forward mess deck. We're taking on water fast. The ship's pumps struggled to keep pace with the influx of seawater, a desperate fight against the rising tide. On the bridge, Commander Becton and Lieutenant Commander Harrison maintained their composure, a calm eye in the center of the storm. Becton, despite a deep gash on his forehead from a piece of flying shrapnel, continued to direct the ship's evasive maneuvers, slight turns of the rudder that, against all logic, seemed to throw off some of the incoming Japanese Val and Judy dive bombers. Harrison, beside him, continually relayed reports, filtering the fragmented information from the various command posts across the ship. Number 440 mm mount reports direct hit. Sir. All hands lost. Fire spreading to the stack. The sheer volume of incoming aircraft was overwhelming. At one point, over 15 distinct kamikaze aircraft were observed by the ship's radar operator closing from various angles. The ship's 40 mm Bofors, though diminished, continued their frantic rhythmic hammering, spitting 25-pound high-explosive shells into the sky at a rate of 120 rounds per minute per barrel. The 20 mm Oerlikons, firing 5-pound shells at 450 rounds per minute, added their own deadly chatter, weaving patterns of tracer fire around the incoming Japanese aircraft. The attacks were not merely random. They were part of a larger, coordinated Kikusui operation, the third major mass suicide attack of the Okinawa Campaign. Intelligence reports, gleaned from decrypted Japanese communications and captured documents, indicated these Kikusui attacks were intended to systematically destroy the U.S. Navy's advanced fleet, particularly disrupting the critical support for the U.S. 10th Army's brutal ground offensive against the Shuri Castle Line. The Laffey was directly in the path of this strategic intent, a deliberate target. Each kamikaze pilot, often barely trained, flew a one-way mission, turning his aircraft into a guided missile, aiming for maximum damage. The Japanese pilots in their Zeros and Vals were often young, barely out of flight school, but their determination was absolute, a chilling resolve that transcended conventional warfare. 10 at 0920, low on fuel and desperate, approached from the port beam, its engine sputtering. The Laffey's remaining 40 mm quad mounts, particularly the one near the ship's mast, focused their fire, a desperate, concentrated burst. The rounds tore into the Zero's fuselage, but it was too late. The aircraft, now a burning husk, veered sharply and slammed into the ship's No. 1 stack, just above the forward engineering spaces. The impact was deafening, the stack crumpling inward, spewing scalding steam and black smoke across the bridge. The explosion from its small bomb, though not as powerful as the initial hits, ruptured more steam lines, sending superheated vapor scalding through the forward engine room. Below, in the inferno of the engine room, Chief Engineer Lieutenant Robert Jenkins, USN, frantically directed his men. Close the steam valves. Cut the main lines. Isolate the damage. The steam, a deadly white cloud, filled the space, obscuring vision, burning exposed skin. Several engineers collapsed, succumbing to the heat and steam. The ship's propulsion was now critically compromised. It was during this specific hit on the stack that Lieutenant Commander Harrison felt the ship lurch violently, a deep, sickening shudder that went beyond mere impact. He heard the rending of metal, a tearing sound, followed by an immediate, terrifying silence from a crucial section of the ship. He looked instinctively at the surviving 40 mm Bofors mount nearby, and then further along the deck. The forward 5-inch guns, the heart of their heavy anti-aircraft defense, which had been firing with such a desperate, continuous roar moments before, were now eerily, profoundly silent. Their heavy steel barrels, usually traversing and elevating with precision, were frozen, pointing uselessly at the gray sky. That was the precise moment. Not just a gun being disabled, but the sudden, total cessation of the heavy, rhythmic thud that had been their constant companion, their shield. When the destroyer's guns fell silent, truly silent, Harrison knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that they were sitting ducks. The relentless pounding of the 40mm and 20mm batteries had continued, a desperate, valiant effort, but it was a diminished roar, a flickering candle against an engulfing storm. Without the heavy shells of the 5-inch guns, their ability to knock a kamikaze out of the sky at range, to break up an attack before it became too close, was gone. The fight was now a knife fight in a phone booth, a desperate, close-quarters struggle. Another Zero, sensing the destroyer's crippled state, came in low from the port quarter, attempting to replicate the earlier successful hits. Its speed was incredible, perhaps 300 knots, 550 kilometers per hour, making it a blurry shape against the clouds. Harrison watched, transfixed, as the ship's remaining 20mm Oerlikons, their barrels glowing red-hot, poured fire into the aircraft. The pilot, in a final, defiant act, seemed to deliberately aim for the crippled bridge. The Zero impacted the port side of the bridge structure, tearing through communications antennae and the chart house. The explosion from its small bomb ripped through the pilot house, killing several key personnel instantly. Commander Becton was knocked off his feet, slammed against a bulkhead, his head hitting the steel with a sickening thud. Harrison, miraculously still standing, rushed to his side, but the commander was unconscious, a deep, bleeding wound on his temple. The ship had lost its guiding hand. Despite the devastating loss on the bridge, the Laffey did not surrender. Lieutenant Thompson, now effectively in command, though still directing damage control from the fantail, continued to issue orders, his voice raw but firm. He delegated authority, trusting his section leaders. The battle had become an exercise in pure, visceral survival, minute by desperate minute. The remaining guns, operating under local control, continued to engage any lingering threats. The 40mm Bofors on the starboard side, though covered in smoke and debris, kept firing, their crews now fighting out of pure instinct. The 20mm Oerlikons, often manned by single, exhausted sailors, tracked and fired until their barrels warped or their ammunition ran out. This was not a fight for glory, but for life itself. The Japanese aircraft, having expended their main effort in the Kikusui attack, began to withdraw, their numbers dwindling. The skies slowly cleared, revealing the full extent of the Laffey's ordeal. She was a ghost ship, listing heavily, shrouded in a pall of smoke, her once proud lines now shattered and broken. Her forward deck was a mass of twisted steel, the stern a burning inferno. The bridge, scarred and blasted, was a ruin. Yet, the stars and stripes, tattered but defiant, still flew from her mast. The flag, though ripped by shrapnel, was a testament to the fact that the Laffey had not gone down. She had bent, but she had not broken. It was nearly 1,030 hours when the USS Macomb, DD-667, a sister ship, carefully approached, her own gun crews at the ready, scanning the sky. They lowered launches, sending over medical teams and additional damage control personnel. Harrison, still dazed, oversaw the transfer of the wounded, directing them to the approaching boats. The scene on deck was horrific. Bodies covered by canvas, the air thick with the smell of blood and burnt flesh, the groans of the injured, the silent shock of the survivors. He saw Chief Petty Officer Miller, his face blackened, his uniform torn, still moving with purpose, guiding his teams. Miller paused, looked at Harrison, and simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the hell they had endured. The full casualty count was grim. 32 men killed, 71 wounded, many with severe burns, shrapnel wounds, and concussions. It was a heavy price, but considering the ferocity of the attack, the sheer number of hits, it could have been far worse. USS Laffey was ultimately towed to Espiritu Santo in the New Hebrides for temporary repairs, a long and arduous journey for a ship barely holding together. From there, she underwent a grueling 8,000-mile voyage to the Puget Sound Naval Shipyard in Bremerton, Washington, for comprehensive overhaul and battle damage repairs. The journey took months, a slow, painful pilgrimage across the vast Pacific, her crippled state a visible testament to the violence she had endured. In the quiet months of repair, Lieutenant Commander Harrison reviewed the after-action reports repeatedly. He studied the detailed diagrams of the Laffey's hits, the trajectories of the kamikazes, the precise locations of the explosions. He noted the chilling statistics. The Laffey was struck by 6 kamikazes, for bombs, and hit by dozens of cannon and machine gun rounds. The ship's 5-inch guns had fired over 450 rounds, her 40mm Bofors over 4,000 rounds, and her 20mm Oerlikons over 8,000 rounds during the 80-minute engagement, a testament to the relentless volume of fire she had put out. Yet, despite this, the Japanese pilots had penetrated. The tactical brilliance of the kamikaze strategy was undeniable, designed to overwhelm defenses through sheer numbers and suicidal dedication. The Okinawa Campaign ground on until late June, eventually becoming the costliest naval battle in U.S. history. Over 36 U.S. Navy ships were sunk, and 368 damaged, predominantly by kamikaze attacks. Naval personnel casualties surpassed 9,800 killed or missing and over 9,600 wounded, far exceeding combined naval casualties from all previous Central Pacific operations. The concept of radar picket stations had proven indispensable, despite the grievous losses, providing the critical early warning that saved countless larger, more valuable ships. The integration of combat air patrol with ship anti-aircraft defenses reached new levels of effectiveness, forcing the Japanese to commit more and more aircraft to achieve any success. Harrison, promoted to commander during the repairs, often spoke of the battle, not with bravado, but with a quiet, reflective solemnity. He would describe the smell of burning flesh, the scream of the valves, the chilling silence of the Laffey's main guns, a silence that had brought with it the absolute certainty of doom. He spoke of the incredible courage of the gun crews, who fired until they were killed or wounded, their positions becoming infernos. He recalled the methodical, almost detached heroism of the damage control teams, who fought fires in scorching heat and shored up bulkheads under torrents of water. This sustained courage, facing death daily in the ultimate exposed position, became a new standard for naval heroism. The Laffey eventually returned to service, a patched-up veteran, but her soul bore the scars of Okinawa. Commander Harrison, like many who had fought on those lonely picket stations, carried a quiet burden. The relentless psychological toll of the kamikaze attacks lingered, a dark echo in the mind. The slightest hum of an aircraft overhead, even in peacetime, could trigger a flash of that morning, the visceral memory of a zero diving, guns blazing. He knew the cost of ultimate victory, the price exacted by an enemy willing to sacrifice everything. The Okinawa Campaign was the final crucible, the ultimate test of endurance for the U.S. Navy, and the Laffey's fight was a microcosm of that epic struggle. The trap, as Harrison had come to understand it, was not just the physical exposure of the picket stations, but the strategic dilemma it represented. The very act of protecting the fleet meant accepting a concentrated suicidal assault. The Laffey was a shield designed to break, but in breaking it bought time and space for the rest of the armada. This was the grim calculus of the Okinawa Campaign, a lesson written in blood and fire. The legacy of the Laffey and her crew became woven into the fabric of naval tradition, a story of unflinching resolve in the face of an existential threat. It was a story told in hushed tones, of men who, despite knowing they were sitting ducks, had held their ground, their unwavering courage a defiant roar against the divine winds. Their sacrifice and the scars they bore ensured that the lessons of Okinawa would shape future naval doctrine, emphasizing advanced radar systems, improved anti-aircraft artillery, and the eventual development of defensive guided missiles, technologies directly influenced by the need to counter the kamikaze threat. The USS Laffey became a symbol not just of survival, but of the unyielding spirit of the United States Navy in the Pacific War, a testament to the extraordinary human element that ultimately prevailed over the fanatical, unyielding determination of the Imperial Japanese forces. Her story, enshrined in the annals of military history, continues to resonate, a visceral account of courage and sacrifice on the edge of the world.